Please welcome to the stage Wells Fargo CIO and Head of Digital Technology and Innovation, Chintan Mehta, Morgan Stanley's Head of Firm-Wide AI Product and Architecture Strategy, David Wu, Rogo CEO, Gabriel Stengel, EY's America's Banking and Capital Markets Leader, Sid Kozla, and our moderator, BMO Financial Group's Chief AI and Data Officer, Kristin Milchanowski.
All right, good morning. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Evident, for having all of us. And it's really nice to be on the stage with friends and colleagues over the years. And so we are here to talk about the insights and the knowledge generation of where we are. And I thought before I kicked it off to talk about how we're doing that in banking at each of our respective institutions, that there's something just to level set on. One is that we are in wave one of generative AI, and that is where we are just doing insight generation. So we're pulling data together from various places, we're adding an LLM to it, and it's spitting out a net new piece of information. Not a net new piece of information, it's spitting out information that's been collected from what exists. Wave two, we believe, is going to be the knowledge content and the knowledge generation, which in and of itself has to still be defined, but it's more than just bringing in the collective existing bits of data. It's going to be really adding that extra bit of knowledge. And we're not quite there yet from a technological perspective. So we're still just dealing with that wave one insight generation. So when we just wanted to level set that for this conversation and for the audience, because that means a couple different things. Really, where's the value, right? So when we're thinking of generative AI and our use cases that we're all doing, currently those use cases, and if any of you are actually driving revenue for your firms that's hitting the bottom line, please come talk to me. I'd love to know what that use case actually is in production. But as far as I can tell, none of us are there yet because we're not driving that extra part because wave two is not here yet, right, guys? So we are doing the efficiency plays that many of us have talked about today, and that helps, right? It helps with our teams. But I just wanted to let's start there. That way we can have like the real honest dialogue about what we're doing and how it's driving results for our firms. So, what are those applications that are driving insights? And David, we talked about some of them last night, so maybe I can kick that over to you.
Yeah, in Morgan Stanley, what we wanted to do when we were thinking about AI is how do we deploy it to the folks that are really adjacent to the clients? And so we specifically started in wealth, going after our financial advisors because they own the relationship. They're focused on deepening trust. And we also most recently rolled out this capability to our investment banking analysts, to our sales and trading analysts, who are also adjacent to their corporate clients, with the belief that if you can just help your client-facing individuals just be more intelligent, get them access to outlooks on investment research, get them access to self-serve information, that not only speeds up their time for sure, the efficiency, but just from a client experience, it's better, right? So now what we've done in wealth is advisors have access to tools that uncover insights from 100,000 documents across research, across products, across procedures. Investment bankers have access to a very detailed level of research content as well, that they're now able to just self-serve, quickly get answers to their clients' questions. And kind of the favorite example I get that comes up all the time is advisors telling me in the past when I get a question around, hey, NVIDIA's earnings calls are happening tonight. What's our sentiment on that? In the past, it takes some work. It takes some work of finding, understanding, synthesizing, producing it back. And now people are able to your point, have that level one insight. They're able to actually literally give responses on the phone call, right? And the last thing I would just say around this is it's just learning, right? what we've learned is that how our advisors and how our bankers engage with AI requires you to almost like retrain how you interact with information, right? So the last 30 years of search have gotten us into this keyword kind of experience. And so you have to almost, with AI, retrain them on moving away from keywords to questions.
Right. So David, before I run to Chintan to see where some of his first use cases are, David, one of the things that I really thought is powerful about where you started with your program and your use cases is that you basically took your highest valued assets, your wealth advisors, and said, let's make them better at what they do or make their life easier at what they do so they can keep adding value to the firm.
That's right, and deepening relationships. Because at the end of the day, I don't think what changes is the value of trust and the value of human connection.
That's great. That's really great.
Yep.
Chintan, talk to us about Wells Fargo. Where are you guys with your journey?
Yeah, so I think there are overlaps with everybody's story, some version of it, some way, form, or shape. So like we've had a customer-facing AI-based product out there in the market for about 1.5 years now called Fargo. It uses natural language processing. It uses LLMs to do agentic interactions. It is transactional. It allows you to do certain transactions. And then obviously there's this whole long tail of internal operational efficiency use cases built up on a common platform we call Tachyon that we have built over the last couple of years. The piece I was going to add to the original point that both David and you made was, I think there's almost like a Hawthorne effect at play, which is the fact that you're putting some experiences out there is generating new interactions which we didn't know about.
That's great.
So there is a version of knowledge creation happening there. It's more around how people are using it, how people get comfortable with this thing. Do they like it? Do they not like it? What parts of it do they like? And I think that is going to be very helpful and indicative for general adoption curves, because I think there's a component of obviously the technical capabilities, but then there's also the and what I mean by that is like, what can an LLM do? Does it do it effectively? Does it do reasoning well? Whatever those variations and those boundary conditions are, there is still a component of will people adopt it, and will they adopt it without sort of is it incremental or is it just exponential? And so I would say, yeah, so I think a lot of internal tools deployed. We have internal assistants being developed which cuts across every different function instead of building like different point solutions. And we'll see how all of these interactions actually make it easier for people and then also for consumers. So we shall see. But I think knowledge is getting created, but more as an interaction and the inside out of it.
Yeah. That's great. So, Sid, we talk about how this raw data can become actionable knowledge insights for our banks. What are some of those things that you've been seeing as you kind of work in and out of multiple financial institutions?
Sure. And look, maybe I'll take a step back and talk about, I know you've talked about the current use cases and how they're unlocking insights and the synthesis element of that, and then the predictive element of what knowledge could be created around, right, use cases around that. I actually think it's a maturation per use case as well, right? So if you think about raw data related to customer service, for example, right, today it's much more focused on harvesting the conversations that are happening, going through scripts, trying to understand, product pricing improvement or client service improvement opportunities. The next layer of that predictive piece around that could, and we're seeing some of our clients starting to talk about that, is to actively be, obviously with the right disclosures, actively be listening on those calls with your agents, suggesting preemptive conversations around a certain product, tying it back to behavioral elements they're seeing through the conversation, and then linking it back to a revenue generation opportunity.
That's good. Yeah.
So I think it's both new use cases, but also the graduation of a use case into a much more predictive conversation around.
So it's the ensemble modeling of the results of these different use cases, and I see Chintan nodding his head too. And David, we were talking about that with Gabe at dinner last night, that the ensemble modeling is you get results from one model, and then suddenly you can bring these different models together to produce something that this is your.
Yeah, and I think it's almost like a graph of interactions, like in a visualization, which is like nobody lives their life in silos of different groups. Data doesn't have to live that way, but it's expensive to bring everything together. And there are data transformation exercises every company has where they're building oceans and lakes and stuff like that. But I think there is a graph component to it where if you actually do it very surgically and intelligently, you can build a much bigger, or a better, bigger is the wrong word, but a better understanding of how people use these things. And I think I agree with that. I think that's a very logical next step.
I would just add real quick, I think that goes to kind of your layer 2 point. And I think and I know Gabe's got a lot of views on this too, but how we bring in disparate data, I think is going to be ultimately one of the most powerful capabilities from AI. For example, in the wealth world, knowing your clients may have a particular desire, maybe they had a kid, maybe they want to understand what resources we have around 529s, maybe they have an investment and they want to understand what that means from a risk perspective, bring in the risk data, bring in the investment research data, the live market data, or even if they're a business owner, maybe they want to access the capital markets, they want to know who the investment banker is that could take them to an IPO eventually, right? Or provide a workplace solution. It's all these pieces that I think are inherent in an organization in silos, and certainly there's entitlements and walls, but I think if you take AI, you abstract it out of these silos and you abstract it out of these apps, you start to really do things that are just inherently hard for someone to do.
And yeah, Gabe, but if you talk to us a little bit about how you've seen these use cases do just that with bringing in that disparate data, because everyone in this audience that works in a financial institution, we are all nothing but a bunch of different conglomerate, data centers and data warehouses and cloud environments and everything coming together into,
And I think it's to your point that knowledge drives productivity, but insights drive revenue. And so if you think about who are your highest leverage, highest earning employees, for Morgan Stanley, maybe it's advisors. For an independent bank, maybe it's their M&A advisors. How do you make them higher leverage to produce the insights that are actually actionable and drive revenue? And so for us, we see that, for an M&A banker to be very smart, there's actually a huge amount of just raw knowledge creation that's not that insightful that has to take place first, right? Maybe you have to run a screen to see what financial sponsors are even interested in the asset you're taking to market before you can take that to the MD, and the MD can actually get smart and produce an insight for their client. And it's almost becoming hackneyed to talk about, but it's never been easier to take unstructured data and turn it into structured data. And the more classical ML techniques of, prediction, of signal processing, some of these insight generation techniques hinge on structured data. And so what we're seeing with Gen AI is the ability to first start to create that structured data out of unstructured, and then go back to these more anachronistic ML techniques to help drive revenue across the business.
I like that. That's a really important first step. And it is a good lesson learned, too, with the LLM world, is that you do have to take that data step in your infrastructure. And if you haven't done that yet, work with your architects and your engineers to take that step. It's a really important one.
Yeah. I'll make one point on that, though. I think do start in parallel. Don't wait for data cleanup to happen before you do AI.
Yes.
I think that is a movie that never ends. So
it's never going to be perfect.
You have to do both of those things at the same time, which is sometimes you find a very high value use case, you work backwards. You go solve the problem and then build the solution. So.
Yeah, look, I can't agree more. I mean, progress is going to be more important than perfection in that topic. I'll take the other use case you talked about, David, around, let's say, capital markets research, right? That is the current use case, which is being exponentially used. But we're seeing early signs of taking, almost in a multi-agent way, what we're learning as synthesis from that use case into what the investment thesis longer term around certain portfolios may need to be. And that's much more predictive. That's much more on the revenue side than let's say, a capital market research type topic.
And I think the group is talking about agents. So, Sid, do you want to quickly define how you view multi-agent frameworks?
Yeah. So the way I think, and very simply, right? I'm not a technologist, but for me, it's a very simple topic. If you're adding insight and synthesis to a certain topic through an agent, and you're having 6 of these disparate use cases, how do you connect all of that to bring that insight, that synthesis, into something that is incremental information beyond those silos? So for me, that's the simple business view to what that looks like.
And I do think that's that wave, too, that is sort of ushering in, which will be fascinating. So the definitions in our space are so important, and we as a collective don't have standard definitions, so we don't all agree on what AGI is, for example, artificial general intelligence. We were even talking and laughing out in the green room about, what's the definition of knowledge in and of itself. So how are we going to define when an agent is smarter or not than a human? And an agent, you have call center agents, which are actually humans, and then you've got bot agents, which are bots, and then you've got these generative AI models that we're also trying to call agents as well. But as soon as we work through all the definitions as a community, we can write another book, I think. Are either of you exploring agents in the generative AI agents?
Yeah, well, we have some in production that we use today, again, in a very controlled environment. And I think it's important that since we started with the definition, agent is anything which has an agency, which means it has a very clearly bounded task. It can execute that task. There is oversight to it. So just that very loose definition, instead of getting into whether a swarm is an agent or whether a magnetic one is an agent or LangChain, doesn't matter. Any component which has a very clear agency, meaning it knows what to start and when to finish and what the conditions for start and finish are, and there's some oversight to it, is agentic. And so we have some specific cases where we have done agentic deployments for doing data extraction, pre-processing, things like that, which are more cumbersome, require a lot of traditional heuristics, and those we have made agentic, and just so as a progression path. We'll learn a whole bunch, some of it is not going to work, but that's the whole point.
By the end of 2025, we have heard that there's going to be more artificial intelligence agents than there are humans in the world.
I buy that.
Yeah, we can take that.
I think it's one of those really exciting, high potential areas, but I think it's still a bit early if you wanted to do really complex things, right?
Fair.
I think If you look at kind of the natural trajectories, first people want to find knowledge, and they probably want to connect that content to data. And the natural next steps, for example, you want to know the outlook in NVIDIA, then you want to know maybe the price target in NVIDIA, you want to know what their EPS was, right? The natural next step is, how do I invoke the tools? And that's not simple. It's not just like you can say, take an agent and learn how to use every tool. Every organization has some inherent, natively built local tools that the AI may never have seen before. Mm-hmm. And if you have, the analogy I'll give you is where kind of I see the state of it, and the fact we're close to Thanksgiving, is that these AI agents seem like they can do maybe one dish at a time, where you teach them to use one tool at a time. I think the promise is, can you get the agent to create the whole Thanksgiving feast, where it has to learn how to baste the turkey, has to learn how to cut, has to learn how to use the oven, right? And that requires a lot of coordination, collaboration, which is, it's not quite there yet, but this is moving so fast, I wouldn't be surprised by 2025, where you not only have many, maybe you don't even need that many agents. Maybe you get a few agents that get more intelligent that can do these complex tasks. I think the other thing to just think about is data entitlements. Like, security is going to be really important around agents. You're effectively giving credentials away to an agent to go and perform tasks for you. I think we just have to be thoughtful around what that means.
We definitely have to bring in ethics and responsibility into everything that we do, and it's sort of ingrained in, I know, all of our ethos. It's a foundational component. So look, the real value to this conversation is that connectivity of the applications to one another, to be able to drive new engagement, to drive the new customer, to drive or the existing ones, and how do you take things off their plate so they can focus on the relationships they already have on their desk. But Gabe, you have some really interesting views from what you're doing, and Sid as well, on bringing all those into the context of one model. Do you want to?
Yeah, and I think that what's really exciting about agents is that we are still figuring out the tasks they're actually good at, the tools they know how to use, the tools we have to teach them how to use, whether it's querying internal data with the right permissioning or creating outputs like PowerPoints or PDFs or even emails. And what's going to be really exciting is when they are actually proactive. And they can be proactive because they have enormous context windows. And they can say, hey, I know that Sid works here and he's interested in this client, and this is where they spoke before, and this is what they spoke about, and this is what I should probably prompt him to talk about next time, to remind him that, he's meeting with David and David just had his first kid and he should congratulate him first. The hard part about all of that and getting the context is not deciding what to put in there, right? We have all the context of our prior relationships in our head, and we know when to surface it. And if you just dump all the context into one of these models, they're smart enough to know that. The hard part, to David's point, is the permissioning around what context to actually put in there. And if you're a banker at Morgan Stanley and you're meeting with Bob Iger at Disney, maybe you want to see all the context for Morgan Stanley, all the times they've spent with the board members, with the different folks on their BD team. You might not have access to all of that. You might not have access to all of that in the CRM or all these different relationships. And so how do you solve these plumbing problems to actually get the models the right context?
Yeah.
I'll make one more point, an additional, we were talking about whether agents will take over everything in 2025 or will be proportionally bigger. I would say customers have their own proxies as agents. I think that is definitely going to happen. So instead of every human consuming an output of an AI, there will be a proxy, which is an AI, which will actually interact with those AIs. And I think it is needed for this to scale safely, because we won't be able to handle the cognitive load of the slop which comes at us, as well as value. Like the noise to actual value ratio is going to keep skewing bad. And so we'll need something to filter that.
And this is where the important conversation around big data comes to play, because big data doesn't necessarily mean better anymore.
Yeah.
So, back when I was at Morgan building the big data environment in Hadoop Cloudera, that was a big deal, and that was a big deal for Wall Street. But now we're backing away from that. We're finding more is not better. So, Chintan, you were talking about backing into what you're trying to achieve, and then making sure you have the right data flows. And look, the precision, I think that's one thing that is often missed, is when you're trying for an outcome, what level of precision do you really actually need from these LLMs? Because you probably don't need 99% or even 100% for a lot of what you're doing. So you could save a lot of tokenization, you can save a lot of power and energy, and then you can save on perfection, because you don't need to have perfect data quality around that. Do anyone of you want to
Kristin,
opine
I think
on
the
that?
big data point is so interesting because, formerly you had to create all these dashboards, all these analyses to actually deliver the insight based on all that raw data. And obviously we're talking more about structured data now. But I think to the point of, how precise do you have to be on delivering context to these models, there's a reason that Chintan formerly was saying that, they prefer Gemini and these longer context windows models. It's because you don't need to be so precise on creating some of these different types of data sources. You don't need to be as precise on creating these sort of actionable BI dashboards. You can deliver raw data to models and have it synthesize more for you.
And I think it's so interesting also, just given where this topic is going. We haven't really talked about the need for more intelligence. Because I think what we're all experiencing, the current state of intelligence is so high that you can drive so many workflows out of that. Instead, I think what we've been talking about is piping, right? How do you find the right data set? How do you pipe them in with enough context that the AI can work around that? I think it's a particularly interesting topic because there's been a lot of buzz in the media lately. Have the AI scaling laws started to slow down, right? Not every 6 months it doubles in terms of intelligence. I think for all of us, I think the conversations we have, we feel like maybe that's not as big a concern for us now, right? Maybe the next 3 years are just getting the right context into the model.
I almost think there's going to be like a Darwinian theory around agents now, right? Because the first sprint here is to be expanding really quickly into various use cases, almost like a controlled chaos way, right? And your point around not just multi-agents within an ecosystem, but multi-agents across ecosystem with your customer, that's going to get important. And then longer term, there's going to be that Darwinian view of how do we get the most insightful use cases and agents foundationally to make impact. So I think that's
going to be entertaining.
So I'm really proud of our BMO insurance team, where they're putting out into production soon this intelligent retrieval for insurance products, and it's just being able to do just that, so that the human doesn't have to go out and do this 2-hour task anymore. So it's it is saving time, and that retrieval is interesting because then it is the basis and the foundation to usher in some of that intelligence. But you're right, it's an interesting dynamic between how you solve that challenge of permissioning even for all the different components.
And I think it unlocks huge opportunities. I mean, we all work at banks, and I think most banks have a one bank, one firm strategy, whereby the wealth capital markets business can connect. And there's certainly walls around that, but does AI allow us to revisit some of these things and say, hey, we can actually really meaningfully, to Gabe's point, proactively suggest this is the banker you should talk to because your client just indicated that they're ready to, move to next phase of their business's maturity, maybe IPO, right? So I think like that's the entitlement, the security, how much of this do you want the AI to even be able to see versus where do you need to start to fine tune some very specific smaller models. I think the toolkit is so deep right now. It's going to be interesting how we all deploy which tool for these purposes, along with which data sets.
I think it goes back to the good old product management, like what is the product market fit? What is the value fit? Right? You can get all carried away, but
you definitely can get carried away. So it's really, really important to make sure that we are like, what's the mission? What's the vision? What's the value? All of us in this room know that game. But I've really have challenged the team recently on, we want to drive revenue. And right now, where we are, a lot of these use cases have been in the efficiency and expense reduction, which is important. But what we're finding is that we as a culture of financial services, not one specific bank, we're not good at carrying through those efficiency plays all the way to the balance sheet yet. And until that maturity comes, what we're doing isn't going to be impacting one for one the EPS. I think the challenge that I'm putting out there is let's drive revenue. Let's figure out how we can use all these bright minds in the room and really get after the revenue targets, because it's a tough time out there right now, right? Yeah. We have 3 minutes left, and I'd love to open it up to the audience for questions, and we've got an eager one right here, so let's go. Mm-hmm. I'll repeat the question. Go ahead.
Okay. Bottom line is, what sort of banker productivity do you expect from the bank in 5 years? So up by 1%, 5%, 10%, a lot of missing data for ROIs.
So do we expect the productivity of a banker to increase by X percent over 5 years? I'm going to let Gabe or Sid answer that question so the three of us bankers don't get in trouble.
No, for the average bank, so it's not about your bank.
For the average bank.
I was briefly an M&A analyst at Lazard, and I think that for an analyst at an independent bank like that, you're going to be at least twice as productive 5 years from now. At least it's not a higher multiple of that. It's harder to say for senior bankers where so much of it is relationship driven, so much of it is, the time and energy they put into their client relationships. But for junior bankers, you'll be a strong multiple of productivity of what they are now.
I also want to remind everyone, but I think this room would probably know, so this is usually the reminder I have to do for the non-tech audiences, but we've been doing AI for over 40 years, especially in capital markets. So 85% of all trade is leveraging AI today. So this isn't a net new era. So that productivity measure, it's going to be really interesting how we hit it.
Yeah, I also think a bank isn't a bank is a bank. And I know your question was an average, but if you look at, let's say, an investment banking franchise, it'll probably be closer to what you said. We were talking about the fancy custodians in the last session. I think there you're going to get a lot more efficiency around that. I think 30-40% is not out of the realm.
One more.
And then you'll see like a capital markets view to that.
Yeah. And to the point, Mike, I think you were asking, if you take a proxy of other industries where this has played out a little bit ahead of banking, so for example, material science, or if you compare it to some of the work which is happening in like video editing and things like that, they do see 30-40% year-on-year improvement in their productivity. So not saying that it's exactly the same, but if that's any guide, then it would go like that.
Well, look, it is a great Thursday, any Thursday that I get to spend with Chintan, David, Gabe, and Sid, good friends and colleagues from the industry. Thank you all for your participation. Thanks for leaning into today's conversation. You are the leaders of where we're headed, and I really, really value you participating in driving where we're going next. Making sure we do it ethically, responsibly, with adding in a sprinkle of diversity, please, is going to be really, really important as we move forward into this next wave that's coming. And it's exponential growth that we're facing. So let's all get really, really good at innovating. We are asking you to stay here. We're not going to take a very long break, but if you should need to use the facilities, you can get up and do that. But we're going to roll straight into our next session. Thank you for your time and attention. Thank you, speakers.
Thank you. Good job.